Hello and welcome back to My Own Worst Enemy. We are getting ready to take a look at the Battle of Eutaw Springs. Now this of course is in the Battles of the American Revolution tri-pack, and I've actually played another game in this series, so I am kind of familiar with the rules, but it's been a really long time, so I wanted to do this playthrough and kind of just start with a basic scenario. This one's supposed to be a good introductory scenario, set it up, go through the rules, and just refresh myself and relearn this system, because I do want to start playing some of the larger battles in this system, because it is a really neat and fun rule set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach this as a learn and play. So if you haven't played this before, or if you're like me and want to just get a refresher on how it plays, this video is for you. So what I will do is I will walk us through the setup of Eutaw Springs, which is in this exclusive rulebook. If you're familiar with this series, there is a series rulebook. It's very rules light, and it's quite an elegant system, honestly. The overall rule set, easy to read, easy to find information, and then it really links in well with the exclusive rule book, so it is not difficult at all. Other things I've done here is I printed out, this is on the GMT website, there was a combat odds table just to make calculations faster, and I also found this on the GMT website. There is this solitaire variant for playing the tactical cards. So in this game, each side can choose a tactics card, and it will have an effect on the combat. So what this does is provide a table that we can roll on to mitigate that. You could also try to choose the best of your ability, but I think here, rolling on this table is probably the better way to go. There is also a player's aid card that we will be referring to for combat and terrain effects and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk us through setup really quick. We'll talk about some of the counters, the counter information, how they come onto the board, and those types of things. So going along right from the scenario book, prepare for play, it talks about the color bands first on the units. So let's go ahead and take a close-up look at the units. Okay, so the first thing it talks about are the British units. So we started here first in the British encampment, because you can see an example of everything they're going to talk about here. If you see a unit that has a red stripe like this one, this is a British regular unit. If you see one that has one of these yellow stripes at the top, these are considered loyalists. And if you see one with a brown, and I think there's a brown under this unit, yeah, so this brown unit, brown bar across the top, this would be a militia unit. So those are the three different types of counters that we have for the British. Now let's take a look at the American counters. All right, for the Americans, if there is no stripe at all, just a blue counter like this, that is considered a regular continental. If there's a dark blue like we have here on the immediate left, these are considered state troops. If there is this light blue bar across the top, that would be a militia unit. And then if there is a green bar like Swamp Fox has here, this green bar indicates partisan units. So those are the different color bands that they are referring to. All right, continuing along, we are zoomed back out, of course. We want to go through the British setup. When we look at the rule book, or not the rule book, I guess the scenario book, it tells us to set up the British and the American players according to the information on their counter. So I guess I should zoom back in one more time here to show us this. So looking at a counter, we'll just grab, let's just grab this bottom one here. And if you can see that there is let's put it back down so I can point. The very top number in this case is just a unit identifier. The one below it is actually the hex number that the unit will start in. So this one says 1309, and the hex I'm placing it in is 1309. So each of these units will have on them a hex number, and in the case of this leader, it's on the side here. But each of these units will have a hex number where they will start at the beginning of the scenario. Now, if we look at the American chits again, let's go take a look at those. You'll note that these are on the turn track. They also have setup information, but in the case of like this Continental, it has a 3A on it. So that means that this will come into the game on turn 3, which is why it's on the turn 3 mark here on the turn track. And it will come into location A. So if you look at the game board, and let's switch over there to look at the where it's going to come in. So here, this is where A is, and this is where that unit will show up on turn 3. You'll place it here at no movement cost, and then when it does move, you will use its movement cost to get it off of that entry hex. So that's basically how you set the game up. Let's zoom back out now. And that's just what I've done. So the British units save this foraging unit way out here. They're in the British camp, this plantation building, which is occupied by this leader. And the Americans are coming into the area. So they're not quite on the board yet, but they will be at the beginning of turn 1. The scenario length for this is 10 turns. We'll go from turn 1 through turn 10. The army morale is up here, and we will set those up. So it says the army morale at start for the Americans is 14. We have a marker to show that. And it shows you here exactly where to start these also. And for the British, it is 13. So as you take losses and things happen on the board, the morale will change. And if you read at the top, high morale, it tells you that you'll get +1 for initiative. And I believe morale, I can't quite read that from here. And as we go down in morale, you'll get fatigued, and then you'll get to wavering, and finally you'll get to demoralized. So you want to keep your morale up in this game. There's this thing also called momentum chips. And momentum chips, if you've played role-playing games, momentum chips are like bennies or momentum in some of the RPGs. Basically, a momentum chip will allow you to re-roll a die roll if you spend it, and there's some other things it can do. We'll check those out as we get to them. So basically, it's a get out of jail free card in certain cases. Can also help you win initiative. That's what I was trying to think of. You can spend these to try to win the initiative. I'm just going to put the momentum chips. The Americans start with 1. I'm going to put it at the base of this American track on this side. I know that we have momentum chips here. British will start with none. For the player order, when we're talking about initiative, so the player order is, if you look down here in the corner of the map, the Americans will have the initiative. In fact, they're the only side that can move in the first 2 turns. So the British are kind of frozen in time as the Americans are coming into the area. Turn 3 will actually start, well, let me hold off here for a second. Turn 4 will actually start rolling for initiative. Turn 3, the initiative will depend on what happens with this foraging party when it is encountered by the Americans. The Americans are able to eliminate this unit. They will get the initiative for turn 3. If they can't stop this unit, it's going to run back and alert the British, and the British will have the initiative for turn 3. So we will look at that as we get to it as well. There's some retreat priorities in this game. So since the Americans are entering on this side and the British are here, the retreat for the British would be basically to the northeast, the east, or the southeast. And just the opposite for the Americans. They would have to, of course, withdraw to this side of the map. How to win. The Americans win a decisive victory at the end of any game turn in which they occupy hex 1108. So hex 1108 is, I believe, did say 1108. Yep. So 1108 is, I think it's in here. No, it's here. So this blue star is the hex that the Americans want to occupy. There is an encampment there, as you can see by those tents. And not only that, it says without the presence of any British zone of control extending into that hex. And the zone of control will extend the 6 hexes surrounding that unit. Then it goes on to say the British will win a decisive victory if they eliminate or capture Green, and Nathaniel Green is one of the leaders for the Americans, and 12 strength points of non-artillery combat units, excluding militia. A minimum of 8 of those units must be continental, so it's pretty tough for the British to win this one. Now, historically, this battle is interesting. It was actually, I think it was chalked up to a British victory, but it really wasn't. It was really kind of a semi-tie in my mind. Basically what happened where the Americans came on, they fought, they actually pushed the British back into this plantation house, and the British were holed up in the plantation house. The Americans came into the British camp and immediately started looting everything in there while taking shots from the British that were holed up in the mansion. And so basically the Americans kind of withdrew from the field, although I understand that Green did leave some forces on the field as if to say, I've won this battle. And it really was more of a tie than anything else. The British did end up withdrawing back to, I think it was Charleston after this. So kind of a British victory, I guess, but not really. Interesting battle. So if you note on the board, there's also these 7 stars. And what that is called the British perimeter. And it says, as soon as American combat units, except artillery again, occupy or pass through any 4 of the 7 hexes, the British player is going to immediately lose 1 step of army morale. So that's pretty powerful. If they could, that's 7 points of morale that could possibly drop on the morale track over there if the Americans pass through that perimeter. Now, the design note here is that this was added to induce the British player to try to come out and make a stand here, because historically that's what they did. So it's kind of an encouragement to get these guys to come out and form a line or defend against the Americans as they come forward. So that's pretty much it for victory. We'll talk about it more as we go along. And then we get into these special rules. So it says for turns 1 and 2, the American player is are American turns only, but the Americans do not get to use strategic, or it says on turn 1 rather, the Americans do not get to use strategic movement. Strategic movement would be using double the movement value on the counters, and I will show you the movement values when we get down to the actual gameplay. Double the value in area and terrain types where you can actually use strategic moves, roads being one of those terrain types. So instead of normally this unit could move 4, it would be able to move 8. As long as it stayed on that road. And then it says turn 3, I've already told you about that. That's where depending on what happens to the foraging unit, the initiative will be determined by the outcome of that. And some things to note about this foraging unit. It may not attack, it may defend, it may not move until attack, and it has a zone to control. And then it also notes that it doesn't gain or lose army morale points, is worth no victory points, and does not cause the American player to gain momentum. So normally when the Americans would destroy a British unit, they would gain one of those momentum chips that we talked about. What else? We've talked about the British perimeter, American surprise attack. So on the first turn in which any American units have close combat with the British player units, with the exception, of course, of that foraging party, we get a column shift on the close combat table. So this kind of simulates the surprise attack by the American army, and we'll get 1 column shift the first time that one of our units or the American units are attacked or attack themselves. Another special rule is the Swamp Fox up here. We'll show you this closer when we deploy him. Yeah, that's Francis Marion. He looks nothing like Mel Gibson. Don't worry about that. He's a demi-leader, so he has certain abilities that a leader would have, but not all of them. And then we have a couple of British leaders. We have Coffin and Marchbanks. And let me show you Coffin and Marchbanks, and it says this in the rule book. It is pronounced Marchbanks. How you get Marchbanks out of that, I don't know. There must be French involved, but that's how it's pronounced, and that's what we'll call him. So there are some leaders to be aware of. Wade Hampton, it says, can only command state troops. That's these blue bar troops, and Hampton will have a blue bar on him on that unit counter, so we will be reminded of that. There is a plantation house here. And this is the plantation house, and it tells us that movement into this hex is prohibited to artillery and dragoons or cavalry. Cost 1 movement point for all others. Zones of controls and line of sights extend out of this hex, but not into. And of course, the British leader is in that mansion to start. And there are some close combat effects there if there's any fighting in the mansion, which probably won't see. And then we talked about, so if you see these little tent markers on the board, and a lot of these units are actually occupying the tent markers, those are the British encampment hexes, and there's some information about line of sight and things like that, but it tells us that when an American unit enters the British encampment hex for the first time, it ends all movement for the turn, and we would put an encampment. There are markers to show ownership for these. I did not put them out. We're just going to say they're British. If the Americans take them, we'll put an American control marker on the board to show that. And then there's this looting table, so we will simulate the looting that took place in the battle if the Americans make it as far as the encampment hexes there. And there's actually looting procedures for how to go through all that in the scenario book. And then, of course, there's some special disordered effects, some rally from disordered effects, some more terrain information about the heavy trees that are on the board, the swamp. So these are swamp territories that will have special information. The Santee River flows through here. The Great Santee Swamp is at the north of the board. There is a ferry over here that has some information associated with it. There's some variable entries for counters. We'll look at those when we start the game. And there's optional British reinforcements. So there are 2 units. These are British regulars that historically, these guys showed up the day after the battle. You have the option to put those in at turn 7, I believe it is. And if you look on the board, it's really good about telling you. So yeah, it says optional British reinforcements. I'm not going to use those. They weren't in the battle historically, so they're not going to be in this battle. And what else? I believe that is it. That is all we need to know. as far as an overview goes. And what I will do now is I will actually take us through 1 or 2 turns just to get this thing started. So one thing that is awesome with this game, the back of the rule book has this really nice extended sequence of play that you can follow through, and that's just what we're going to do, starting with the initiative. And you'll remember this is the series rule book, but in this scenario rule book, the Americans have the initiative, and actually the only action is the first 2 turns, so we will skip that and go to the movement phase. So let me zoom in again real quick here and show you this. All right, so we're at turn 1. It is the Americans, as I said, and we have this stack of units that says, if you look, it's hard to see, but it says 1A. So that means this stack will come in at location A. So let's do that. I will grab those and move them over there. All right, we are on location A, zoomed in, and here's our stack. So again, there's no movement expended for coming onto the board. We'll only begin the movement calculations once we start moving. There are stacking limits in this game. You may have 6 strength points worth of units stacked. When they come onto the board, you can overlook that, but when you end their movement, you must adhere to all stacking regulations. I should also note that it is 6 strength points worth of units you can have stacked, plus a friendly artillery unit. The artillery unit would not count their strength points in that calculation. So let's move our units, and of course, again, this is turn 1. The Americans are not allowed to use strategic movement. So if you look on the counter here, that first number is the strength point. That second number is the movement. Above that, you'll see a 0. That's the morale that will be used to calculate the close combats. So let's see, actually, let's take a look and see who all is in here to begin with. There's a cavalry or dragoon, however you want to say it. It means the same thing in this game. Here's a continental, and below that continental is, looks like a Lee's Legion. So a couple of dragoon units and a couple of militia units, military units. Infantry is what I really should say here. So let's go ahead and start, and let's move the cavalry first. So where do we want to move the cavalry to? We can only go 4, starting in hex A. And let's go ahead and move these guys forward. So 1, 2, 3, 4 would get us to this hex. Yeah, let's just move them forward. They're galloping along, and actually they can go 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got to be careful, because if we enter the zone of control of a unit, let's see, you can't see that. Let me move this over. All right, a bit of a better view. So I was saying that you can't enter the zone, well, you can enter the zone of control of this unit, but if you do, you come to a stop. We don't want to do that. You'd also have to engage in combat, but we're not ready to do that. So these other 2 units can move 4, so we'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4. We will move both of these forward. So that is how it looks at the end of the movement phase. Let's zoom back out. All right, we are zoomed back out. Those units have entered, moved forward. They're moving towards the foraging party, and that completes the movement phase. Next, we go into the rally phase, and this is where we would do morale checks for disrupted units, shattered units, those types of things, but we have none of that now. We're just now starting day 1. It's the morning, and we haven't even had any combat yet, any contact. Next thing we do is go into defensive artillery fire. So in this game, your artillery will fire defensively only, but there are no artillery units capable, there's no artillery units that the British have that are capable of doing that. Again, we just have the foraging party that's in range, and he can't even attack. The next thing we would go into is a rifle fire phase, and I didn't show you this, but let's zoom back in real quick. And actually, there's 2 things I want to take care of here. All right, so a rifled unit, I know that the Swamp Fox here has a rifled unit that is currently with him. If there's an R on the counter, that means this is a rifle unit. It has ranged fire similar to artillery. So it can do ranged fire as well as close combat. Now, the other thing I wanted to do while we're here is before the game started, I should have chosen, and it's not too late, I should have chosen, if you look at the Swamp Fox counter and the one that's below it, it has a 2A or 3B. So that means that these units can enter either on turn number 2 in hex A or location A, or they can enter in turn 3, which is location B, which is at the north of the map in the swamp. So I should have chosen before we started. I'm going to choose now, and I want these units to come in on turn 3. So I want them to come in on the north part of the map, and I'll show you that. Let's zoom back out, and I will show you where I want those units to come in. Okay, we are zoomed back out, and I want those units to come in location B, which is here. So that is the Swamp Fox and that unit with him. I want them to come in from B. So they're going to come in from the north, and maybe we can use them to flank some of these units that are in this encampment. Again, you can choose to have both of them come in at A if you wish, or you could split them and have one of them come in A and one of them come in B. Entirely your choice, but that's how I'm going to play it. I think the Swamp Fox would come out of the Santee Swamp, so that's what we're going to do. So that is the rifle fire phase. Again, we have no one to fire. And then close combat would be if we had a unit that was adjacent to an enemy unit, but we don't have that. And that is it. We would go into the second player turn, but the British do not get a player turn in the first 2 turns. And that would take us into the end of turn segment. So that is 1 complete turn. What I will do is stop it here. So if anyone has any questions, you can leave the questions in the comments below. If I said something wrong, also let me know that in the comments below. Again, this is a learning game, and we want to learn together, figure out how to play this thing together. This is a great system. And like I said, I'm going to play a large battle, and this is kind of getting me geared up towards that. I recently received the Battle of White Plains, I think it's called, and I want to get that one to the table too. And I also think, if I'm not mistaken, there's another tri-pack of this coming out from GMT. I need to go back. If I did, I probably already pre-ordered it. I think that's the case though. Anyway, we will stop it here, and I just wanted to get this to the secondary table. I know that some of you probably aren't interested in what's going on in Federation space, so I decided to start another game, and that's this one, for the people that like the historical things more than the sci-fi things. So we will have both of these games running simultaneously. Okay, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps support this channel, and subscribe if you haven't. That also really helps support the channel. Thank you for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you back here next time.